I've lived 73 years on this earth, survived 2 wars, buried a wife, raised 3 children mostly on my own, and built a furniture business from nothing but a second-hand lathe and a dream. But I want to tell you something. Nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for the moment my daughter slapped my hand at Christmas dinner in front of the whole family and made me feel, for one terrible second, like a scolded child. My name is Harold Eugene Calloway. Most people call me Harry. My grandkids call me Gramps. And on the 25th of December, at 68 minutes past noon, I reached for a snickerdoodle cookie from the platter on my daughter Renee's kitchen counter, the same platter that had been sitting there since I walked through the door, smelling like butter and cinnamon, and every good thing I've ever known, and Renee's hand came down on mine, so fast it made a sound. A sharp little smack that somehow cut through the noise of 12 people talking, Frank Sinatra on the Bluetooth speaker, and 2 grandchildren chasing the dog around the island. Everybody heard it. I felt 12 pairs of eyes swing toward me at once. Renee's husband, David, looked up from the ham he was carving. My son Marcus, visiting from Portland, froze with his beer halfway to his lips. My youngest, Tommy, actually laughed, not a mean laugh, just a startled one, before catching himself. Even the dog stopped running. I pulled my hand back. I am 73 years old. I have not been told what to do in a very long time. Let me back up a little, because you need to understand something about those cookies. My late wife, Carol, made snickerdoodles every Christmas from 1978 until the year she passed, which was 2019. Same recipe she got from her mother, same ceramic platter with the little holly leaves around the rim, same motion of rolling the dough in cinnamon sugar until her hands smelled like Christmas itself. For 41 years, I watched her make those cookies. I watched her slide them out of the oven and set them on that platter, and I always stole one before dinner. It was our thing. She'd swat my hand away playfully and say, "Harold Calloway, you wait like everyone else." And I'd grin and sometimes get away with it and sometimes not, but it was the game we played, and the game meant something. Carol died on March 4th, 2019, pancreatic cancer, 91 days from diagnosis to burial. For 3 Christmases after that, nobody made snickerdoodles, not because we forgot, because none of us could face it. The absence of those cookies sat at the table like its own kind of grief. This year I walked into Renee's house and saw that platter on the counter, and my heart did something complicated. It cracked open a little, and something warm poured out at the same time. I didn't even think, I just reached. And that's when Renee's hand came down. I stood there for a moment, not knowing what to do with my face. I'm a man who's coached Little League and testified in a deposition, and once talked a supplier out of a contract breach without raising my voice. I know how to control my expression, but standing there in my daughter's kitchen, with my hands stinging and 12 people watching, I felt my jaw tighten in a way I hadn't felt since I was a boy. I turned to look at Renee. She wasn't looking at me. She was already turning back toward the oven, reaching for a dish towel, moving the way she moves when she's running a kitchen, efficiently, purposefully, without apology. I made a decision. I wasn't going to make this a moment. I wasn't going to embarrass her back in front of her children and her husband and my sons. I was going to take my dignity and walk it over to the living room and sit in the armchair and wait for dinner like a civilized person. I turned to go. And that's when I felt her hand on my arm. Not a slap this time, gentle. Fingers closing around my wrist the way she used to when she was small and wanted my attention. I stopped. She leaned in close. I could smell her perfume, something light and floral, and underneath it, cinnamon sugar on her hands. She whispered 4 words into my ear. "There for Mom's grave." I don't know how long I stood there. Long enough for the world to shift on its axis a little. Long enough for my throat to close entirely. Long enough for Marcus to quietly usher the grandkids toward the other room without anyone asking him to. I turned around and looked at my daughter, really looked at her. She was 44 years old, and she had her mother's eyes, and she was watching me with an expression I recognized because I'd worn it myself for 3 years. the face of someone who is holding themselves together by sheer force of will in a public place. You made a separate batch, I said. It wasn't a question. She nodded. Same recipe, same platter. I'm going to take some out to Riverside this afternoon after dinner. I wanted, she stopped, cleared her throat. I wanted them to be whole, all of them. I was going to take you with me if you wanted to come. I have no memory of what happened to my face in that moment. I only know that David appeared from somewhere and handed me a glass of water I didn't ask for and then disappeared again, which told me everything I needed to know about what my face was doing. We went after dinner, Renee and I. The sun was already low by 3 o'clock in December, that thin winter light that turns everything the color of old photographs. Riverside Cemetery was quiet except for the wind in the bare trees. Our footsteps on the frozen path made sounds like hushed conversation. Carol's headstone is gray granite with her name and dates and a small etching of a lily, which was her favorite flower. I come here sometimes by myself, and sometimes I don't say anything at all, and sometimes I say too much. Today, I let Renee do the talking. She knelt down and set 4 snickerdoodles on the small stone ledge at the base of the marker. She'd wrapped them in a piece of wax paper tied with a red ribbon, the same way Carol used to wrap them when she sent plates to the neighbors. Hey Mom, Renee said, we had everyone over. Dad behaved himself mostly. She glanced up at me with something like a smile. Tommy wore that ridiculous sweater again, the one with the reindeer that lights up. David burned the first batch of rolls, which you would have given him grief about for a decade. Her voice stayed steady, but barely. The grandkids are so big, you'd love who they're becoming. I stood with my hands in my coat pockets and listened, and I thought about how much of grief is simply continuing to talk to someone who can no longer answer. How we keep the conversation going because stopping it feels like a second loss. When Renee stood up, I put my arm around her shoulders. She leaned into me the way she used to as a small child, head against my arm, and we stood there in the cold for a while. I should have told you, she said finally, about the cookies. I made them this morning and I kept thinking, if anyone takes one before I can get them there. I know, I said. I didn't mean to embarrass you. You didn't, I meant it. You did exactly right. She looked up at me. Are you sure? Because Marcus said you had your stubborn face. Marcus doesn't know what he's talking about. She laughed, a real one, the kind that sounds like relief. Here is what I know about family at 73, having spent most of those years getting it wrong and some of them getting it right. The moments that matter almost never look the way you expect them to. They look like a hand coming down on yours at the wrong time for the right reason. They look like a daughter who carries her mother's recipe around in her head like a prayer and wakes up on Christmas morning to make something beautiful out of grief. They look like 12 people in a kitchen falling quiet all at once, and then finding their way back to noise and warmth and the smell of cinnamon. They look like 4 words whispered so softly you almost miss them. I have reached for things my whole life, for success, for certainty, for control, for the last cookie on the platter. And the older I get, the more I understand that the reaching isn't the point. The point is learning to pause long enough to hear what someone is trying to tell you. The point is being present enough to receive what the people you love are quietly offering. My daughter made her mother's cookies on Christmas morning and saved every single one for a gray granite headstone at the end of a frozen path. And then she asked me if I wanted to come. That is love, that is family, that is everything. We drove home in the early dark, the heater running, the radio low. Renee had brought 2 extra cookies in a separate bag. These ones are ours, Dad. I'm not completely heartless. And we ate them in the car, warm from her coat pocket, tasting like every Christmas I've ever had. They tasted like Carol. They tasted like exactly what they were, something made with care and handed across time to the people left behind. When we got back to her house, the lights were blazing in every window, and I could hear the grandkids through the walls before she even got the door open. I stopped on the front step, looked up at all that warm light. Renee, I said. She turned. Thank you for taking me. She took my hand, squeezed it once, and we walked inside together.